The package felt wrong. Not heavy, but stiff. Too stiff for a standard business letter. It was the third one in the mail cart that morning, September 11th, 1962. Hannelore Vendy, secretary to Dr. Wolfgang Pilz, ran her thumb over the crisp edge of the manila envelope. The return address was a prestigious law firm in Hamburg. Plausible. Her boss had business everywhere. She slid it open with a brass letter opener, a gift from her husband. Inside, a book. A technical manual, it seemed. She pulled it from the envelope. It was bound in thick cardboard. Something was off about the weight distribution. A subtle imbalance. For a fraction of a second, her mind registered the anomaly. A flicker of professional curiosity. A thought too slow to become a warning. Her fingers, following the well-worn script of 1,000 mornings, pried open the cover. The motion was less than an inch. The air inside the office at Factory 333, a sprawling, sand-swept complex south of Cairo, was cool, conditioned against the brutal Egyptian sun. That cool air rushed into the tiny space between the cover and the first page, where a pressure-sensitive switch, no larger than a thumbnail and crafted with the precision of a Swiss watch, was waiting. The circuit closed. A 9-volt battery, nestled in a cavity carved from the book's pages, delivered its charge to a detonator pin. The pin struck a small, meticulously measured quantity of hexagen explosive. It was not enough to demolish the room. It was not designed to. It was designed to do exactly what it did next. A yellow-white flash, instantaneous and absolute. A sharp, cracking sound, like a whip breaking the sound barrier next to her ear. Hannelore Vendy never saw the shards of metal and plastic that had been the book's binding. 5 of them ripped into her face. 2 more tore through her hands. She didn't feel the impact. She felt only a sudden, silent heat. And then the world was gone, replaced by a screaming red darkness. Her own scream was a disconnected sound, an alarm from a body she no longer controlled. In the next office, Wolfgang Pilz, a man who had once calculated the trajectories for Hitler's 5-2 rockets, dropped his slide rule. He knew that sound. It was the sound of a meticulously planned, deeply personal failure. It was the sound of a promise being kept. It was the sound of the Mossad, the urgent teleprinter message that clattered to life in a soundproofed room on the 3rd floor of Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv, did not describe the flash or the scream. It was code. A single prearranged phrase referencing a verse from the book of Samuel. It meant, target acknowledged. For the man reading it, Iser Harel, it was validation. Harel was short, perpetually intense, a man who seemed to vibrate with a constant, controlled energy. He was the Memune, the one in charge, the first and, at that time, only head of the Israeli Institute for Intelligence and Special Operations. His defining achievement, just 2 years prior, was the abduction of Adolf Eichmann from a street in Buenos Aires. He had located a ghost and brought him to justice. His skill was not just intelligence gathering. It was an almost pathological refusal to accept limitations. For Harel, the phrase impossible was merely a failure of imagination and will. He viewed threats to Israel not as political problems, but as existential cancers that had to be excised. With a scalpel if possible, with a cleaver if necessary. He placed the teleprinter flimsy into a metal tray. The contents would be ash in 60 seconds. Across the chessboard, his opponent sat in the presidential palace in Cairo. Gamal Abdel Nasser, the charismatic, undisputed leader of the Arab world. Nasser's great achievement was his defiance of the West. culminating in the 1956 nationalization of the Suez Canal. He had faced down British and French paratroopers and through political maneuvering emerged a hero. His skill was his voice, a voice that crackled over radios from Baghdad to Algiers, promising a unified Arab nation, a restoration of pride, and the eventual, final erasure of the Zionist entity. He was Israel's most formidable enemy, not because of his army's size, but because of his ability to inspire millions with a single, potent idea. And Nasser understood a fundamental truth of modern warfare. Israel's air force was superior. Any conventional war would begin with Israeli jets dominating the skies. To win, to truly threaten the Jewish state, he needed a weapon that could not be shot down. A weapon that could arc over the battlefield and strike Tel Aviv, Haifa, Dimona. He needed rockets. The third player in this game was the man whose secretary had just been blinded, Wolfgang Pilz, a brilliant, amoral rocketry genius. His achievement was his work at Peenemünde, the Nazis' top-secret V-2 development center. He was one of Werner von Braun's top deputies. His skill was propulsion systems. He knew, better than almost anyone on Earth, how to make a large, liquid-fueled rocket defy gravity. After the war, he worked for the French, then found himself unemployable in a denazified West Germany. Nasser's offer was a lifeline: unlimited funding, state-of-the-art facilities, and a chance to continue his life's work. He, along with a cadre of other German scientists and technicians, packed their bags for Cairo. They were the brains. Factory 333 was the body. And the missiles they were building, the Al-Zafir, the Victor, and the Al-Kahir, the Conqueror, were the sword Nasser intended to hang over Israel's head. Supervising the operation on the ground for Mossad, reporting directly to Harel, was a man whose name would one day be known to the world, but for now was a shadow. Yitzhak Shamir, a former commander in the hardline Lehi Underground, the Stern Gang. His most significant past achievement was a trail of successful assassinations and sabotage operations against the British Mandate. His skill was cold, brutal operational logic. He understood the mechanics of fear. While Harel conceived the grand strategy, Shamir was the man who would turn it into a series of actionable, unforgiving steps. He was the perfect instrument for the task at hand. The chessboard was set. The year was 1962. The Suez Crisis of '56 had left Nasser politically stronger, a symbol of post-colonial defiance. He was now cementing his ties with the Soviet Union, receiving tanks, jets, and political backing. Israel, for its part, felt a chilling isolation. Its main ally, France, was beginning to pivot away. The United States was still keeping its distance, wary of upsetting the Arab oil states. To Harel, Israel was a modern-day Mossad, a fortress surrounded by a sea of enemies, and the water was rising. He saw Nasser's missile program not as a conventional military development, but as the groundwork for a second Holocaust. A fleet of rockets tipped with conventional explosives, or worse, chemical or radiological warheads, could hold Israel's civilian population hostage, making any future military action impossible. It was a checkmate weapon. The genesis of the mission, codenamed Operation Damocles, was an intelligence failure that became a terrifying success. For months, Mossad's station in Cairo had been feeding Harel reports about Factory 333. The consensus was that it was a vanity project, technically difficult, plagued by problems. The Egyptians, the thinking went, lacked the industrial base to produce the sophisticated components. The Germans were past their prime, milking a gullible dictator for money. The assessment was comforting. It was also completely wrong. On July 21, 1962, Nasser staged a massive military parade in Cairo to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the revolution. As Israeli military attachés watched from the stands, their blood running cold, a series of enormous, truck-mounted rockets trundled past the saluting Nasser. They were painted with bold Arabic script. The victor, the conqueror. They were real. They were big. And they were pointed, metaphorically for now, directly at Tel Aviv. Mossad's long-range spy planes, modified Boeing Stratocruisers, made high-altitude passes, their cameras capturing sharp images of the missiles. The analysis was grim. The designs were crude but viable. They were V-2 derivatives, liquid-fueled, with a potential range of 300 to 600 kilometers, enough to cover every major city in Israel. That night, Harel convened an emergency meeting. The assumptions were shattered. The Vanity Project was a strategic threat of the first order. The problem was not the factory itself. Bombing it would be an act of war, and it could be rebuilt. The problem was not the Egyptian technicians. They could be trained. The problem, Harel stated, slamming his hand on the table, was the 70-odd German scientists and engineers who had sold their expertise to Nasser. Without their knowledge, the missiles were just hollow tubes. The mission was clear. This was not a job for diplomacy. This was a job for the Institute. The objective: make the Germans go home, by any means necessary. Operation Damocles was activated. The first phase of the plan was pure, classic espionage. It was silent, methodical, and it happened not in the heat of Egypt, but in the cool, orderly cities of West Germany. Yitzhak Shamir's operational blueprint was a masterpiece of patient aggression. He dispatched teams of Katsas, Mossad's elite field intelligence officers, to Munich, Stuttgart, and Hamburg. These were not commandos. They were chameleons, men and women who could pass as German businessmen, Swiss bankers, Italian journalists. Their primary targets were the companies supplying the Egyptian missile program. Firms like a Stuttgart-based electronics company that was manufacturing the guidance systems. A small machine shop in the Ruhr Valley producing specialized turbine blades for the rocket engines. The Katsas' first task was to build a complete human network map. They didn't storm the factories. They seduced the secretaries. They didn't bug the CEO's office. They befriended the engineers at the local beer hall. One agent, posing as a headhunter, managed to get a full list of employees from a key supplier. A list which included notes on which technicians had recently taken extended consulting contracts in Cairo. Another team set up a front company, a bogus import-export firm that did business with one of the target corporations. This gave them legitimate access to shipping manifests. They meticulously cross-referenced part numbers, delivery schedules, and end-user certificates that all pointed to shell corporations registered in Zurich and Tripoli, but whose ultimate destination was Heliopolis, the Cairo suburb housing factory 333. Within 3 months, Shamir's teams had a dossier on every significant German national involved. Not just their names, but their habits. The brand of cigarettes they smoked, the financial trouble they were in, the arguments they had with their wives. They knew who had a gambling problem, who had a mistress in another city, who felt underappreciated by their Egyptian paymasters. This database of human frailty was the ammunition for the next phase. The soft approach began in the winter of 1962. It was a campaign of psychological warfare. A scientist named Hans Kleinwächter, an expert in electronics, returned to his home in Lörrach for the Christmas holidays. One evening, an Israeli agent, a smooth, German-speaking man, identifying himself as a security advisor for NATO, met him in a quiet hotel bar. The agent didn't make threats. He asked questions. He laid out photographs on the table, not of rockets, but of Kleinvechter's children playing in a park. "They're a beautiful family," the agent said, his voice calm. "It would be a tragedy if their father's work in Egypt were to be misunderstood. These are dangerous times. People might think you are helping Nasser build weapons of mass destruction. Imagine the consequences." The message was clear. "We know who you are. We know where your family lives." The next day, Kleinvechter received a package. Inside, a book on rocket technology, with a single passage highlighted, a technical description of a catastrophic engine failure. Another scientist, a propulsion expert named Dr. Paul Gurk, was approached in a similar manner. He was more defiant. He told the Mossad agent to go to hell. 2 days later, his car, parked outside his Munich apartment, inexplicably caught fire. The fire department ruled it faulty wiring. Gurka knew better. The campaign was subtle but relentless. It was fear by 1,000 cuts. But the core group of scientists, led by the formidable Wolfgang Pilz, held firm. They were well paid, protected by Egyptian state security, and insulated by a kind of professional arrogance. They believed they were untouchable. The soft approach was not working fast enough. Harel, watching the continued progress at Factory 333 from Tel Aviv, grew impatient. The pressure was mounting. He ordered Shamir to escalate. Phase 3 would require new tools. It would be louder. The technology of Operation Damocles was a blend of sophisticated tradecraft and brutal simplicity. For surveillance and communication, the teams in Europe used the latest technology available. The problem was communicating securely with Tel Aviv without being detected by German BND or Egyptian intelligence, both of whom were now on alert. The solution was the burst radio transmitter. It was a briefcase-sized device that could record a message, compress it into a digital squawk lasting less than a second, and transmit it on a prearranged, rapidly changing frequency. Even if intercepted, it was almost impossible to locate the source or decipher the message without the corresponding one-time pad, a set of unique, randomly generated cryptographic keys printed on flammable paper, a new page used for each message and then immediately destroyed. The limitation was the risk of transmission itself. The Katsas had to find new, seemingly random locations for each broadcast. A moving car, a remote farmhouse, the top floor of a busy hotel, to avoid triangulation. Every message sent to Harel was a calculated risk. But the most significant piece of technology was not electronic. It was the letter bomb. The devices were designed and assembled in a clandestine Mossad workshop in Paris, a place known only as the Workshop X. The lead engineer was a former Haganah bomb maker, a man who thought in terms of chemical reactions and pressure points. The problem was simple. How do you deliver a powerful psychological blow through the mail? The solution was a device designed not to kill, but to horrify. The explosive charge was small, just enough to maim and disfigure. The true genius was in the trigger mechanism. Early prototypes used chemical timers, but they were unreliable. The breakthrough was the pressure switch design. A thin, flexible metal strip was held apart from a contact point by the pressure of the book's cover or the package's flap. The moment that pressure was released, the moment the package was opened, the circuit would complete. It was elegant, reliable, and terrifyingly intimate. It turned the simple, trusting act of opening a letter into a game of Russian roulette. The limitations were in delivery. Getting a package from Paris into the hands of a specific target in a secure Egyptian facility was a logistical nightmare. It required exploiting the international postal system, using multiple cutouts and front companies as return addresses to make the origin untraceable. Each package was a small, self-contained mission. But Harel and Shamir knew that physical threats alone might not be enough. They needed to turn the scientists' own countries against them. This led to the most audacious part of the plan: information warfare. Mossad intelligence had picked up rumors that, alongside the missiles, some of the Germans were working on a far more exotic project for Nasser, a Strahlenkanone, or death ray. The project was scientifically absurd, likely a scam by the scientists to extract more money from the Egyptians. But Harel realized the truth didn't matter. The idea of it was a weapon. Mossad agents, posing as concerned German expatriates and peace activists, began leaking documents to the European press. These documents, a mix of authentic technical papers from the missile program and cleverly forged materials about the death ray and plans to use radioactive cobalt, painted a terrifying picture. German scientists, heroes of the economic miracle, were building weapons of mass destruction for an Arab dictator bent on destroying Israel. The story exploded. Newspapers in Germany, Switzerland, and France ran banner headlines. "Nasser's death ray," screamed one. "German science in service of hate," cried another. Public opinion, which had been indifferent, turned sharply against the scientists. The German government, deeply embarrassed and under pressure from both its public and from Washington, was forced to act. They began to publicly investigate the very companies that the Mossad had been secretly targeting for months. The psychological noose was tightening. Just as the operation was reaching its crescendo, it began to unravel. The first major setback was Heinz Krug. Krug was a key figure, the manager of a Munich-based front company called Intra that procured materials for the missile program. He had been one of the first scientists contacted by Mossad's soft approach. The pressure got to him. He was terrified. He decided he wanted out. But he was afraid of the Egyptians as well. In a fateful miscalculation, he reached out for help to an old acquaintance from the war, a man he believed could protect him. The man's name was Otto Skorzeny. Skorzeny was a Nazi legend, Hitler's favorite commando, famous for his daring glider rescue of Benito Mussolini. He was the last person anyone would expect to be involved. But Skorzeny, living in fascist Spain, had a secret. In one of the most bizarre arrangements in the history of espionage, he had been recruited by the Mossad. They had offered him protection from assassination attempts by other Nazi hunters in exchange for his services. Krug, unaware of this, believed Skorzeny was a friend who could negotiate his safety. He met Skorzeny in Munich. Skorzeny promised to help. He told Krug he had arranged a secret meeting with Israeli intelligence to guarantee his safety. He drove Krug to a forest outside the city. Waiting there were Yitzhak Shamir and another Mossad agent. What happened next is murky. The official sanitized version is that they intended to interrogate Krug. The reality is that the confrontation went wrong. Krug resisted. A struggle ensued. Heinz Krug was killed. His body was dissolved in acid, his car driven to France and abandoned. He had vanished from the face of the earth. The Krug disappearance was a disaster. It was one thing to intimidate, it was another to commit murder on German soil. The German police launched a massive missing persons investigation. The case became front-page news. Mossad's carefully constructed covert operation was now a criminal matter. Harel was furious, not at the killing, but at the sloppiness. He had to divert critical resources to misdirect the German investigation, planting false leads that suggested Krug had absconded with company money to South America. The operation had crossed a line, drawing exactly the kind of attention it was designed to avoid. The second setback was even more public. Escalating the pressure campaign, Harel authorized direct action against the family of Hans Kleinwächter, the electronics expert who had been previously warned. An Israeli agent named Joseph Ben Gal, along with an accomplice, traveled to Basel, Switzerland, where Kleinwächter's daughter Heidi lived. Their mission was to threaten her directly, to make it clear that the scientists' families were no longer off limits. They cornered her in a university hallway. "If your father does not stop his work for Egypt," Ben Gal warned, his voice low, "he will not be able to visit your grave." But the Swiss authorities were not the Germans. Alerted by the general uproar in the press and possibly tipped off by a rival intelligence agency, they were watching. As the two Mossad agents attempted to leave the country, they were arrested at the border. The Swiss police were efficient. They found evidence linking the threat to the Israeli state. It was an open and shut case. The diplomatic fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The Swiss government formally accused Israel of coercion and illegal intelligence operations on its territory. The German government, already reeling from the Krug affair, issued a stern condemnation. In Tel Aviv, Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion was incandescent with rage. He was in the middle of delicate negotiations with West Germany for economic aid and military hardware. Harel's cowboy operation, as Ben-Gurion's aides called it, threatened to derail everything. Ben-Gurion summoned Harel. The meeting was brutal. He ordered Harel to shut down Damocles immediately. All agents were to be recalled. All operations were to cease. Harel, for the first time in his career, was facing a direct order from his prime minister to stand down in the face of an existential threat. He refused. He argued, pleaded, and insisted that they were on the verge of success. To stop now would be to hand Nasser the victory. Ben-Gurion was resolute. The risk to the state's diplomatic relations was too great. The meeting ended in a stalemate, but Harel knew his time was running out. He had a window of perhaps a few days before Ben-Gurion would force his hand. He had to deliver a final, decisive blow. He made a call to the Paris workshop. He needed one more package. The best one they had, addressed to Dr. Wolfgang Pilz, Factory 333, Cairo. The apex of Operation Damocles was not a single moment, but a rapid, cascading series of events compressed into 72 hours. It was a symphony of fear, orchestrated from a soundproofed room in Tel Aviv, its notes landing in Cairo, Munich, and Basel. Harel, defying the Prime Minister's implicit order, put the final phase into motion. He was betting his career on this last, desperate gambit. 10 Zar a.m., September 10th, 1962. A postal clerk in Zurich processes a small, stiff package originating from a non-existent legal firm in Hamburg. The package, containing the book bound with hexogen, enters the international mail stream. Its journey is statistically unremarkable, one of millions of pieces of correspondence crossing borders that day. Its contents, however, are an act of war in miniature. 09:15 m. September 11th. The mail cart arrives at the administration building of Factory 333. A low-level security guard checks the return addresses. The Hamburg law firm raises no flags. The cart is wheeled into the executive suite. 09:34 a.m. Hannelore Wende begins sorting the mail for Dr. Pilz. She places bills in one pile, journals in another, correspondence in a third. The stiff manila envelope with a book inside goes onto the correspondence pile. Onasinet 41. M. Dr. Pilz buzzes on the intercom. He asks for a file from records. Hannelore Wende leaves her desk, leaving the mail cart untouched. The package sits, a time bomb waiting not for a clock, but for a human hand. Zonneistad 52 a.m. Wende returns to her desk. She decides to open the most interesting-looking packages first. The book from the Hamburg law firm looks substantial. She picks it up. 9:52 on 14 a.m. She slits the envelope. 9:52 or 18 a.m. She slides the book out. Her brain registers the slight weight imbalance. A fleeting neural signal, a thought that dies before it can form. 9:52:21 m. Her fingers grip the cover. She begins to open it. The pressure on the copper strip inside is released. 9:52:21.05 a.m. The 9-volt battery energizes the detonator circuit. 9:52:21.7 a.m. The detonator pin strikes the explosive. The world in the office dissolves into a flash of light and a high-velocity spray of plastic and metal. The news of the explosion at Pilz's office doesn't travel through official channels. It travels through the panicked, informal network of the German expatriate community in Cairo. Within an hour, every German scientist working at Factory 333 knows. They don't know the details, only that Pilz's secretary, a nice German woman they all knew, had her face blown off opening his mail. The psychological impact is immediate and devastating. The threat is no longer an anonymous phone call or a burnt-out car in a distant homeland. It is here. It is in their offices. It is in their mail. It can't be stopped by Egyptian bodyguards or perimeter fences. Simultaneously, Harel's assets in Germany execute the final push. 08 p.m., September 11th, Munich. The wife of another key scientist, a man named Wolfgang Klein, receives a phone call. The voice is calm and speaks perfect German. Your husband's life insurance. Is it paid up? We suggest you check. Click. 11:45 p.m. September 12th, Stuttgart. A small explosive device, this time attached to the ignition of a car belonging to another engineer, detonates. The device is again designed to be non-lethal. It blows the engine block apart and shatters every window in a 15-meter radius. The engineer, who was upstairs in his apartment, is unharmed physically. Psychologically, he is destroyed. The message: we could have killed you in your car this morning. We can kill you tomorrow. Back in Tel Aviv, Ben-Gurion learns of the renewed attacks and the bombing in Cairo. His fury is absolute. He summons Harel. This time, it's not a request. It is an ultimatum. Resign or be fired. Harel, seeing the panicked reports coming in from his agents about the scientists' reactions, knows he has already won the battle, even if he is about to lose his job. He accepts. But the final note of the symphony has yet to be played. The news of the Swiss arrests, Joseph Ben-Gal and his accomplice, becomes a major international story. The trial is swift. Ben-Gal, a loyal soldier to the end, refuses to say anything. But the evidence is overwhelming. They are convicted. The Israeli government is forced to issue a formal, humiliating apology to the Swiss. The public exposure of Mossad's methods creates a firestorm. Harel's operation, so brutally effective in the shadows, has become a political catastrophe in the light. The immediate fallout was a cascade of resignations. Wolfgang Pilz, the brilliant, unshakable leader of the German contingent, was the first to break. The attack in his office, the maiming of his secretary, was the final, unanswerable argument. He packed his bags and, under a cloud of Egyptian recriminations, flew back to Germany. His departure was the crack in the dam. Within 2 weeks, nearly every other senior German scientist had followed him. They cited family concerns, health problems, contract disputes, anything but the truth. But Nasser knew the truth. His prized missile program had been decapitated. The brains had been forcibly extracted. The project limped on with Egyptian engineers and a few remaining low-level German technicians. But its momentum was gone. The Al-Zafir and Al-Kahir missiles, the pride of the 1962 military parade, never became operational weapons. They were plagued by guidance failures and engine malfunctions that the remaining team had no hope of solving. They were, as one Israeli analyst later quipped, the most expensive pieces of scrap metal in the Middle East. The factory that was supposed to build hundreds of missiles capable of striking Tel Aviv produced less than a dozen unreliable prototypes. The existential threat that had haunted Isser Harel had been neutralized. The cost, however, was immense. Operation Damocles succeeded in its mission, but at the price of its architect. On March 26, 1963, David Ben-Gurion announced to his cabinet that he had accepted Isser Harel's resignation. The official reason was a long-standing disagreement over the authority structure of the intelligence services. The real reason was Damocles. Harel, the man who captured Eichmann and paralyzed Nasser's master plan, was out. He had won the war and been fired for it, a victim of his own ferocious, uncompromising success. The operation was buried, classified at the highest levels in Israel, denied in Germany, and spun as a tale of technical incompetence by Egypt. The world moved on, but the story was not over. The final revelation, the piece that recontextualizes the entire frantic, bloody affair, would not emerge for decades. It lay hidden in the complex legacy of the operation, an echo that would shape the future of the Middle East in a way no one, not even Harel, could have fully predicted. The true twist was not that Harel was fired for his success. It was the nature of that success. Operation Damocles did more than just stop a missile program. It fundamentally altered the strategic calculus of the entire region. With the missile threat removed, the Israeli Defense Forces General Staff could plan for the next inevitable war on their own terms. They knew they would not have to fight with a gun to their civilian population's head. The fear of rockets raining down on Tel Aviv while their army was engaged in the Sinai or the Golan was gone. This newfound strategic freedom was a critical psychological component in the planning and execution of the lightning preemptive strike that began the Six-Day War in 1967. The confidence to launch that war, a war that would redraw the map of the Middle East, was born, in part, from the echoes of that single explosion in a Cairo office. But the most profound legacy, the final secret, was about the enemy himself. Years later, declassified intelligence and memoirs from former Mossad officers revealed something astonishing. While Damocles was raging, a secret back channel had been opened between Israel and Nasser. Emissaries, including a respected European academic, were meeting with Nasser's inner circle, trying to find a diplomatic off-ramp, a way to de-escalate the conflict. Nasser, the great pan-Arab nationalist, was listening. He was beginning to understand that the path of total war was a dead end. Operation Damocles, in its brutal efficiency, slammed that back channel shut. It taught Nasser and the entire Arab world a different lesson: that Israel was ruthless, that it would operate anywhere, and that there was no line it would not cross to ensure its survival. It replaced the faint possibility of dialogue with the certainty of implacable conflict. The letter bomb that blinded Hannelore Venda did more than just cripple a missile program. It destroyed a fragile, secret hope for peace. The operation, designed to prevent one war, inadvertently helped to pave the road to the next one and the one after that. Its success was absolute, and its consequences were tragic, a perfect, brutal illustration of the paradox of the Shadow War. Sometimes, the greatest victories are the ones that plant the seeds of future defeat.